Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Robert Klein. I'm Associate Dean for Professional Development and Faculty Affairs in the School of Medicine. We call it PUDFA, and there's no U in it. So that usually gets a laugh. It didn't. Okay. I need some new material. I have a couple of announcements. You probably have noticed we've switched from first Friday to last Friday. We have trouble getting this room. Somehow student activities and classes take precedence over our program. I don't understand that, but yeah, that's probably a good thing. And then just getting some speakers. And as always, the staff in my office, and particularly Marty McLaughlin, get a thank you for doing most of the work on this and getting this program arranged. Marty wanted me to tell you a few things. First, the change from first to last Friday. And then there's a Thursday mixed in just to keep you on your toes and keep us on our toes. There were some requests, and please fill out the surveys. We actually do listen to those. So there is a speaker on green issues, and then there was a request for, which is a perfect segue into this, there was a request for a hospital leader who had made it through a natural disaster. So that's our segue to today's speaker, who is Mary Sweet. She is CEO of Kiowa County Memorial Hospital in Greensburg, Kansas. She's worked in healthcare, I guess that's 30 years. Okay. She holds an X-ray and EMT license, has served on Kansas Hospital Association committees, and I just told her it's a good thing. First committee that's listed, Emergency Preparedness Technical Advisory Group. Strategic planning, that's probably a good thing too, and council on education and some other committees as well. Since the tornado, she's given numerous presentations on emergency preparedness and lessons learned in Greensburg. Today she'll share with us her professional experience during that disaster and also talk about some of the personal issues and emotions when your community is wiped out. So, Mary, the stage is yours.
Thank you for having me here today to share with you. I always have to start out, I'm not an expert. Some people said, well, what would you have done different if you had had a chance to do something different? I hate to say it, but I would have moved the week before the tornado. So I'm not an expert, but I can tell you what worked for us and what happened to us. On May 4th, 2007, we called it our perfect storm. The head of KHA used to talk about perfect storm in medicine being a combination of insurance and government regulations coming in and harming health care. For us, ours was actually a tornado. We're down in Midwestern Kansas. If you know where Pratt and Dodge are, we're on Highway 54, a major highway, small community, about 1,200 people. I always told people, I don't know how they did the census. I think sometimes they counted our dogs and our cats. I never counted 1,200 people, but that was the official census. We had 11 churches. That means we're either the best people in the world or we need it. That's why we have 11 churches. Had a 25-bed critical access hospital, had schools, downtown businesses. I'd actually lived there for 29 years. I grew up in the military. My dad was in the military, graduated in Germany from Frankfurt American High School. Didn't ever expect to find myself in a small rural community. Actually, when I landed there, my husband was working for a gas plant for Enron. Ended up there. We were trying to get closer to where my parents lived, where his parents lived, and I actually thought I had fallen in a hole and couldn't dig my way out. When the tornado hit, what I discovered was this is my home. People left the community after the tornado. What we found is the people that had deep roots stayed in the community, and so I stayed. The tornado happened at 9:45 on a Friday night. You know, I said if God was looking out after us, I guess this is what happens. If a community had to have a tornado, maybe we were someone that could handle it. Happened at 9:45 on a Friday night. No church activities, no in-town school activities. We had 30 kids at a forensics tournament in Salina, 15, 16-year-olds, the kind of kids that would be out driving around the lake, you know, at night, 9:45, not knowing where they're at. They were out of town. We did have a track meet going on. It had been called because of bad weather. The principal, who was the track coach, brought him in and said, you go home or I flunk you tonight. You don't graduate this year. You don't go to a grade next year. And those kids actually went home that night. It was on the ground for 22 miles. We had a lot of warning. Our sirens actually went off for 20 minutes. I always tell people I thought we were a pretty prepared community. We'd done a lot of emergency preparedness. the year before the tornado, we had our kids come into a program. We wanted to educate them on emergency preparedness. We wanted to give some information about the community. So we had them bring in their old school bags. Every child has a school bag from last year that they don't know what to do with. So we had each business donate some items. We had bottles of water. We had those hand warmers. We had some little pocket knives. We had rolls of duct tape, things you can buy at the dollar store for $1. But as we put them in their bags, we talked about it. We said, what do you need to do? You may not be able to drink the water in your town. Duct tape is wonderful. If you don't have shoes, you can duct tape cardboard around your feet. If it's wintertime, you can duct tape newspapers around you. So we felt like we'd given our kids a good basis. And I always tell people my son was 11 years old, and that night he actually took his kit down to the basement with him, and he was so proud of himself telling me, Mom, that's the water I drank because I wasn't sure I could drink any other water in the house. So I always tell people our kids will lead us. I'm a believer that if you teach your children, they will lead us. Adults don't wear seat belts because we want to. We wear seat belts because our kids wear seat belts. You know, I always told people my dad never wore a seat belt when he was alive. And my little boy started wearing a seat belt. He says, Grandpa, if we have a car wreck and you come over, you could kill me. You've got to wear your seat belt. And guess who wore their seat belt after that? My dad. This is a graph of tornadoes. This is the graph of an average-sized tornado. This is the size of our tornado. It was given an EF5 rating. It's not because it was the most powerful tornado ever, but that was a new rating that they gave to tornadoes. Since that time, they've since given another EF5, and it's based on the wind. This is what our community looked like the next day. I was actually in Topeka at a meeting. I'd gone to a KFMC meeting. For some reason, spent the night because I was tired. Never spent the night at a meeting on Friday nights. I'm a single mom with 2 kids at home. Never stayed on a Friday night. And for some reason, I did that night. Started getting calls at 9:45. The town's gone. Now, my 2 daughters are calling, Mom, where are you? Where are you? The town's gone. You know, you're thinking, we in Kansas live with tornadoes. How many of you have been in a tornado? Probably quite a few of you. You know, we all live with tornadoes. It's a fact of life in Kansas. So I'm thinking, how bad can it be? So I jump in my truck and I'm headed home and I'm thinking of all the emergency preparedness things. You know, I got to get my staff, find out where my patients are, look at our alternate site. Do we need to go to the alternate site? Not really realizing that any site I'd picked in Greensburg, Kansas was gone. You know, our alternate sites were gone. But the closer I got and started listening to the radio, okay, it's gone. So I actually stopped at a Walmart in Wichita. I'm sure they still talk about the crazy woman with the pickup that stopped and said, I have to get supplies for Greensburg. About $1,000 worth of tarps and gloves and shoes. People ask me, why did you think of that? I had a son missing that night. In Greensburg, I had 2 sons and 3 granddaughters in town that night. I could make contact with my oldest son, knew my granddaughters were safe, but I didn't actually find my 11-year-old till the next day. So I tell people that's how I drove. I had to focus on what things I had to do. Did I take advantage of the fact that I'm a hospital administrator? You bet I did. I called the ambulance services, I called the helicopters, and I called the hospitals I knew they were being transferred to. You had an 11-year-old brown-headed boy that no one claimed, because he's mine. Tell me where he is. But he was safe. He just was in a house and didn't evacuate with everybody else. Our world did change forever. Other communities have had tornadoes, but I think ours was unique in the fact that we lost everything. We lost our infrastructure. We didn't even have power back in the community for about 6 weeks. And we had people that actually built houses and 6 months later didn't have power inside the grid. So it was a little bit different. We did miss people for about 24 hours. They weren't trapped. What happened was we had a church that 3 women had sought shelter in but never told anybody that that's what they did during tornado warnings. And so when the church collapsed on them, they were safe in the basement but couldn't get out, and they were on the edge of town. So it took that long for rescuers to find out where they were. We were lucky in a small community. We all know our neighbors. I don't think anybody left their block without checking on neighbors. I know my son talks about we came up, we went and pulled McChristians out. We went and pulled Jolene and Max out. The only one they couldn't find was someone he called Grandma May, an older woman. But we found out later her children had come and got her before the tornado. One of the things I think Greensburg did well is we listened to the warnings. I've since become more interested in tornadoes, and I'm always amazed at people that tell me we didn't know it was coming. Now, I know there's a couple tornadoes that drop out of the sky, but all of us have been watching TV on a night when it's the end of the show or there's a sports game on, and guess who comes on the channel? The weatherman, talking about hook echoes, and the only thing you can think of is shush, be quiet. I got to listen to the rest of my show. If I'm on a soapbox, I said this would be my soapbox. Listen to the warnings. Think about what you're going to do if it comes. If you're sitting here today, if you had 5 minutes to go downstairs and you knew when you came back up there was nothing left, what would you take with you? What would you take with you if you had 5 minutes? And I will tell you, men, you're the ones who need to think about this, and I'm going to tell you why. In smaller groups, what do women tell me? Women tell me their purse, their children, their scrapbooks, and their dogs. Men, they have never mentioned you once. And when I ask them, well, think about it. When you're not taking your husband, guess what they tell me? My husband's outside with a video camera videoing the tornado. Haven't you ever seen the news reports where the guy goes, it's coming, it's coming. Oh, wait a minute, it's here. So guys, quit videoing, go downstairs with your families, let your children tell you what you need to do, and wear shoes to your basement. We lost all our emergency services. One of the things our hospital did was we managed a local ambulance service, and we had decided that we would try to split our assets, split our services, split our equipment in case we ever had a tornado. We'd been doing this for years. So we had one ambulance that went 10 miles away and one stayed on site. The problem with the one that went 10 miles away, it couldn't get back into town. There was so much debris, they really couldn't do anything initially. I always like to show this picture. Our power supply was gone, our schools were gone, our water tower. This here is our elementary school, and I like to show this area right here that I'm pointing out. If this tornado had happened on any given day, on school day, we would have lost a whole bunch of our children. This is where my son sheltered during tornadoes. And so I tell people it's fine for me to stand up here and talk about what we did and what worked. The fact of the matter is, if it had been a different scenario, if it happened during a school day and we'd lost a lot of our children, I don't know that we would have rebuilt. It would have been a whole different picture. The way it was, we did lose 11 people that night, and then 2 more people died later of their injuries. It did destroy homes. It went down the center of Greensburg. There was 1 block on the west and 1 block on the east that were essentially not destroyed. Destroyed our grocery store. You can kind of see where the ambulances lined up. This was on the highway. And so as they responded, we had over 20 ambulances respond that night. Now, for people in healthcare, I've had the question asked of me, how did you verify they were healthcare workers? You know, in the state of Kansas, we've talked about getting together some kind of a registry where you would present your ID. If you showed up in Greensburg that night and you had a light on top of your vehicle, you got to work. I don't think anybody asked you about your license. I like this picture here. This combine was not part of the furniture offerings in Greensburg. The man actually went, he flew a half a block in that combine and walked out of it. All our churches were destroyed. This is our downtown. This bank, I always like to show it as an example of what you have to do in a disaster. I tell people we didn't follow any of our emergency plans. The first thing the governor's committee asked me was, did you follow your emergency plans? Talk about being scared to answer that question. I had to say, no, I didn't have anything left. But I think it's important that you have to plan so you know how to plan. You have to know how to adapt. This bank, we had 3 banks in town. They were all destroyed. Take someone who's lost their home. They know their business is gone and they have no money. They don't even have a purse with ID. What's the first thing they start thinking of? How am I going to afford this? So this banker, 2 of the banks had subsidiary banks in other towns, so people weren't as nervous. But Greensburg State Bank didn't have that. They were a standalone bank. This man went and got $750,000, put in the trunk of his car, put a card table on the street, and by 3 days later was giving money to people in town. Now, was that probably a good banking rule? Probably not. Did it work for us? Yes, it did. I always show this is our donut shop. This was run by an older woman. Our kids have had such a large learning curve in all of this. I have 4 children. 2 of them were grown and married, but I had a 15-year-old and 11-year-old. The lady who ran the donut shop, he liked her. He said she makes better biscuits and gravy than I do. I'm not sure that's true, but that's what he always said. She had breast cancer and survived that. She had a hip break. She survived that. She survived the tornado that night. Went to live with her daughter down in Alabama and was hit by a semi-truck the next week and was killed. Now, for my son, he had a hard time with that. He had a hard time with the tornado. He thought a lot of people died. One of the things I did that was probably wrong is tried to hide from my son what had happened. He was pretty traumatized that night. He'd been, my ex-husband had left him and went, he was a volunteer fireman, and went and tried to help people. So my son was by himself that night, pretty much most of the night. And neighbors would pass him, you know, they were going to go seek shelter, take the bus to a shelter, so they would give him to somebody else. So he was pretty traumatized by it. So I tried to keep him away from all the newspapers and stuff. What I didn't realize is that he thought everybody had died that night. Everybody moved away. As the administrator of the hospital, I brought a camper in within a week and was living in Greensburg, one of the few people living in Greensburg, because we were starting a tent hospital, and I thought I was doing the best thing. I didn't. I probably heard him, because a month later he kept saying, "Who died, Mom, who died?" And so we had to go back and look at the news articles, and that did seem to help him. This right here is our library on Main Street. If you've ever been in a tornado, you know. Does this keep going in and out? Is it just me? You know tornadoes do weird things. It destroyed all our brick buildings, but look at the books on that bookshelf. Where's my little arrow? Right there. The books were on the bookshelves. Now, it rained for 3 straight days, so that didn't help us. More of Main Street. It's amazing we didn't have more deaths that night. As I was coming in, they were telling me to project 200 deaths. They were actually asking me to stop and pick up body bags that night. What we found was people listened that night. It was on the radio. Our sirens were going off for 20 minutes. How many of you have police radios, police scanners? I don't find those often in big towns. In a small town, we all had police scanners. My excuse was I was a hospital administrator. The fact of the matter is, if a siren goes off in Greensburg, Kansas, that might be the only thing exciting for the whole month. So we all had police scanners, and we listened to those police scanners. And that night, part of our policy was to get a policeman behind every storm. We would put a policeman behind the storm. And as the storm took out houses, he was on the radio saying, "This house is gone, this house is gone. It is coming, get down, get down." Now, when I asked him later, he got a medal for that. And he said, "Actually, my 3 kids were at home by themselves, and I was telling them to get down in the basement." And he said that was the sign we had talked about. When I say get down, you've got to get down. So, but we did have a lot of people respond that night. Vehicles are not safe. If you're in a vehicle in a tornado and you don't want to get in the ditch, this is what may happen to you. One of our deaths was actually from a truck driver that was pulled out of his vehicle. Another one of our deaths was in the basement. He sought shelter in the basement. When the lights went out, he left from underneath the steps to go get a flashlight, and a truck went through the floorboards and pinned him and killed him. So when we say go to the basement, go to the safe place in the basement. We did have responders immediately. Again, I was in Topeka. I didn't get in until 3 o'clock in the morning, and by that time there was lots of responders. They continued to respond for us. We had a lot of CERT teams, the volunteers that helped search. That was one of the things that happened to us. Make sure if you're in a disaster and you're searching buildings, you coordinate what you're doing. The traditional sign is that they put an X on the door to show that they've searched it. And the traditional sign is if they draw a circle, that means there's a body there. And as I was coming in, I was trying to work with MERGE. I was trying to work with emergency preparedness in Southwest Kansas and the Highway Patrol. And we had actually made the decision if we found fatalities, we would let them stay there. We didn't have any place to really put them, that we would look for survivors. And one of the CERT teams evidently saw a circle on a building and put a circle on every building, thinking that they were saying it was clear. So we eventually had to go back and search every other building, because initially we thought we did have a lot of deaths. Now, Mr. Schwarm, is he here? I think he's associated with the organization. He actually helped set up a morgue. When the tornado hit, have you ever heard, sometimes you're being punished for a disaster? Well, we had just opened our county up to selling liquor in a liquor store. So when it first happened, some of the religious orders in our community said, actually, God was punishing us. If that's the case, he probably has a strange sense of humor, because guess what 2 buildings weren't damaged in the tornado? Our liquor store and our bar. So the bar got picked to be the morgue that night. Again, lots of people responded. The insurances responded. Government, Governor Sebelius responded. The news crews were a blessing and a curse, I think, at the same time. A lot of misreporting. They did a series on Greensburg on the Discovery Channel. I don't know if you've seen that, a couple seasons. Again, sometimes it didn't represent the true things that we did. I know I was on the Weather Channel. They did a 30-minute segment on my son and what happened to him that night. And they asked me, and I was so proud, my staff did all the right things. We didn't have one injury at the hospital, they did all the right stuff. And they asked me about building green. And I said, oh, we're so proud of that, you know. And at first we thought it was kind of a gimmick because we'd never really thought of it, but then we kind of got into it. And guess what segment they put on the TV show? We thought it was a gimmick. So anyway, they were a blessing, though. They did bring us a lot of needed help. President Bush came. Heart to Heart, they come out of Olathe. They were a medical unit. They actually showed up. We'd had a relationship with Dr. Morsh in the past, and they came in by Sunday after the Friday night tornado. They were set up on Main Street, and they're the ones who offered our medical services for about the first 2 weeks. Lots of volunteers brought food in. It was kind of interesting. They had all these stacks of stuff, and it was like, where do you put it? I lived in my truck for a week. You know, where do we put this stuff? Policemen from Topeka, they came in. They actually were at our facility, or at our town for probably till about August, helping us out. Communication was the key. I always tell people after the initial tornado, we weren't fighting for our lives. We were fighting for our way of life. You know, initially there was a lot of discussion. Are you going to rebuild Greensburg? Why would you build this small community? There's nothing left. Why would you even do that? It was an easy answer. It's my home. It wasn't, are we going to rebuild? It's how are we going to rebuild? We managed 2 rural health clinics, and one was 10 miles away, which was a big blessing because our staff knew where to go to get information. And the next day, we're a Great Plains Hospital. Great Plains Health Alliance leases our facility. So we met, and by the next day, we were committed. We will pay you for 2 months. The biggest fear in a health facility is that you're going to lose your staff, and if they leave, they don't come back. We knew we had a great staff. We knew we had great nurses, you know, great ancillary care. So we told them, we're going to pay you for 2 months, regardless of whatever happens. Wait, you know, give us a chance to rebuild. So we also set up a large tent in Greensburg. I always like this picture of the crisis volunteer. In any disaster, mental health is a big issue. And in a small rural Kansas community, it's very difficult to push that on people. You know, our farmers are pretty stoic. We had a mental health center in our community, but people were always resistant to, you know, people are going to help me. These people were wonderful. They stood outside, they gave us food, and they just talked to us. We lived in Femaville. They'd come around the weekends. Do you just want to talk? Do you just want to talk? Marvelous people that responded. This is what our hospital looked like the day before the tornado. This is what it looked like the next day. This is my office right here. I always tell people it wasn't the cleanest in the world, but it did look a little bit better than that. Any ideas I give you, again, I'm not an expert. I can just tell you what worked for me. You're welcome to use. I will tell you the reason we had no injuries that night is because I copied another hospital administrator. When Waukene had their tornado, their administrator was going around doing some talks, and I listened to what he told me. And traditionally in hospitals, they go in the hallways. You know, they shut the doors, they shut the curtains, and they go in the hallways. We've always thought that was a safe place to be. I heard him talk after his tornado, and he said, I know when the roof went off, the door flew open, and a street sign came through the window and hit my nurse, and I thought she was dead. And I came back to our facility, and I said, we have got to start moving. We have a basement, we have an elevator. We've got to move. And guess who told me no? My nurses. What? Are you kidding me? Do you know how many storm warnings we have in Kansas? Do you know what time they happen? They happen at night. Do you know what our patients don't like? Being told they have to go sit downstairs. Now, how many times do you think we've moved in the 12 months prior to this tornado? 5 times. We had made a commitment. We sat down. We talked about it. We are going to move if there's a possibility of a tornado. I'm telling you, if you wait till you see the tornado out your window, it is too late. It is too late. And I firmly believe, every time I talk to a hospital group and they tell me it's too hard to move, I firmly believe that they will be held responsible at some point for what their decisions are. But you have to also listen to your staff. I always tell my staff, I give you the right to act in this building, but guess what else I give you? I give you the responsibility to take the actions. So as an administrator, I'm not the best boss. I came up from the ranks, they say. I started out as a file clerk in the x-ray department. I became an x-ray tech. I didn't know how to handle my patients that the ambulance brought in, so I took an ambulance EMT class. I wanted to know what to do with them. Well, then, of course, I had to run on the ambulance. One time medical records was short a typist, so I typed. So I became a medical transcriptionist. When the administrative assistant left, they said, can you just fill in for a couple months? Sure, I can do that. Got a new administrator, worked with her for about a year. She got cancer, didn't want to replace her, wanted to have that position open in case she came back. So they said, would you just do it temporarily? Sure, I can do that. Well, then when they were ready to replace her, I didn't want the job. I've always wanted to just be a mom and a housewife and work part-time, But I will tell you how my boss did it. On the sheet of paper that they sent me, they said, who's your mentor? Does anyone know Mike Frost? He's a regional vice president for Great Plains. He's my mentor. He convinced me that I can do it. And the fact of the matter is, when people ask me, how did he convince me? He told me who my boss was going to be if I didn't take the job. That's how he convinced me. But then he also gave me the ability to, I always tell people, he gives me the ability to fail, but then he helps me come back from it. And so he's always been there for me. So he was my administrator. But anyway, this is my hospital. This is my department. I always ask people, where do you store your current records? I was pretty efficient before the tornado. I'm not quite so much now. See this file cabinet right here? That was all my records that I had completed. All the things I was done with, the neat little files. They were wet, but they were safe. Look at my desk. Everything that I currently worked with sat on my desk on this little movable file, so every day I came in, I knew exactly what I was doing. They're probably in Nebraska. So I always tell people the medical records we lost that night were in doctors' boxes waiting for signatures. The charts that we had completed on discharge patients, they were in a safe place. So look at where you store your current records. They asked me if my emergency plans were followed. No. This is my employee entrance to respond in emergencies. I didn't use that car to block it, by the way. It flew a half a block. This is our emergency preparedness building. We were really proud of ourselves. We had all these extra wheelchairs and cots and things. Couldn't use any of it that night. I just put this sign in because that was pretty much where our emergency room was that night. This is our handicap entrance. We lost all our patient services. One of the things that was a surprise to me is how much we could salvage from the building. Nobody would let us salvage anything. I always used to tell people I was cheap. I've been told to say frugal now, but I'm actually pretty cheap. We had an electrical surge that came through the building, then it rained for 3 straight days. No manufacturer would warranty their equipment. My liability insurance wouldn't sell me liability insurance if I used anything from the old building. Too afraid of what would happen if it failed later on and somebody was injured, and they would come back and say, you use this. So this was our new Dade bearing machine that we couldn't use. This was our emergency room. Again, how could they use it that night? Again, we had 20 patients, 10 staff members. We had moved downstairs. We had about 50 public members. In our community, the only place that was really open 24/7 was the hospital. We had a basement that had a cement floor. That's where they were sheltered, no injuries at all. I always tell, something I started telling you earlier was, how do you get your staff to buy into this? Every time we moved, I offered cookies. I see you all came, got great lunches. I'm a firm believer in give them food, they'll come. So we have cookies, pizza. Every time we moved, we'd talk about it. What didn't work this time? I had a nurse that was terrified of being stuck in the elevator. That was her biggest fear. I'm going to be stuck in the elevator. So guess what we did? We called the elevator company in. What do you do if you're stuck in the elevator and the power's gone? You go in the little elevator closet, turn the knob, let the hydraulic fluid come down. Then you take a screwdriver, stick in the hole, and wiggle it, and the door pops open. And so we did that as an in-service. Let's open the elevator door. We laminated the procedure, stuck it on the wall, and that was no longer an issue. What's the next issue? Next issue is the beds don't fit the elevator, okay? So when we got new beds, guess what a spec was? It has to fit the elevator. We had brand new Stryker beds put in 2 days before the tornado, and 2 patients moved downstairs that night with them. What's your next issue? Patients hate it. Okay, patients hate it. So we bought a DVD player and a portable TV, and guess what they got to do? They got to watch movies. Plus, we always had the best cookies in the world, so guess who gets free cookies? And then the nurse goes, well, what if they're diabetic? Now you might disagree with me, but diabetics will not die from one cookie. I know that. Bored. Okay, so now what do? A lot of places I've worked at don't want your families there. I'm a big family person. If you don't integrate your family with your work, you don't stay. If your family's sick, you take care of them. I almost didn't come today. My mom had surgery for breast cancer yesterday, but she's doing well. But I'm a firm believer that you have to integrate family. So I told him, in a tornado, bring your families down. Guess what an 80-year-old woman in the hospital likes? cookies, and a 5-year-old reading a book to her and giving her a bottle of water. And that's what we did. And you know what? Did my patients like it? No. Did my nurses like it? No. But they bought into it. They bought into the fact that this is what we have to do. And I always tell people, my first thought that night when I heard the tornado hit was, did they move? And you know what? They had. But that's because they bought into it. I had a woman whose mother was in a swing bed intermediate, and every time they moved, she'd come and talk to me. You know, my mom hates it. Her back hurts, you know. She really hates this. Guess who was one of the first people I saw after I got back? Was her. She said it took me 3 hours to get into town to find out my mother wasn't dead. And she said, I have to tell you, thank you for sticking to your guns. And so I have to tell you, if you look at your plans and you believe in them, I'm not saying you have to be so mean, but if you believe in them, get people to buy into them. It will make a difference at some point. Lost our CT and our x-ray. I always tell people my x-ray was in the middle of the hospital and didn't have any windows or anything, and they always say, can't you put a skylight in? I put one in, and look what they did. They quit working. This ambulance, and I told you we left one ambulance in town. In hindsight, this was probably the best thing I did, and guess why? You know, we always thought the best thing was moving one outside because we'd have resources to come back in. They couldn't access the ER that night. The doctor in our community went into there, got the paramedic bag, and actually believes he saved someone's life that night. Was that in my plans? No. But did he know how to plan? He knew where the resources were. He knew how to use them. So that turned out to be a great thing that we did. Patient rooms. Whoops. We did manage the rural health clinic across the street. It was completely destroyed. You know, you talk about your patients and your patient services, but you have to look at your business office also. We didn't have business continuation insurance. That's something a lot of small hospitals didn't have at that point. That became very instrumental because we didn't have money to function on. If you lose your business office, you can't bill for services you've already offered. That information's gone. Now, fortunately, being part of Great Plains, we were able to recover that fairly quickly. We weren't on electronic medical records yet, but we did have a lot of computer information. We found out after the tornado that our IT person had actually gone in, pulled the server out that night, and put it in a cement basement, and was able to and saved all that. So it was a matter of hooking it back up. Did I know he did that? I didn't know he'd done that in the past. This was our medical records department. We originally said all our records were gone. 3 days after the tornado, when things had settled down a little bit, the Army Corps of Engineers came in and said, you know, there's files underneath this cement roof. And they took some telephone poles and sheared that up, and we were actually able to recover our records. Now, I had a hospital call me the other day, and a lot of their records were wet. Very expensive. We had a company come out and say, we take your wet records, we dry them off, they won't be moldy. What we didn't understand in the confusion was they took everything. I had my computer information where I could pull off reports of x-rays. Our radiologists refuse to read any mammograms. You know, they look at them, but they won't really use them as comparison because they've been wet and then dried. Guess what that service cost us? $286,000. So I tell people, if someone comes in a disaster and says, you have to do this, look at what you're salvaging. See what you can do. A clinic called me the other day, and a lot of their records were wet, and I said, can you copy them yourself? You know, look at the state regs. What do you have to save? We were a small community. People lived there forever. We had records back to when they were 2 years old, and they might have been, you know, 60. So look at what you have to save, look at what you realistically are going to need. Dietary services. They set up shelters 10 miles to the east and 10 miles to the west. In western Kansas, there's a town every 10 miles. I always tell people that wagon trains, they stopped every 10 miles every night. And every night somebody said, I'm not going another step. Made a town. So they set up shelters, but in the town itself, nobody was really living there except a few of us. And so we had those stainless steel freezers that weren't infiltrated by the wind and by all the dust and everything. So I always tell people that we started serving food out of the hospital. We started with the cookies first, just in case we weren't there very long. And then we got the frozen stuff, and then we found a barbecue grill, and then we found an unexploded propane tank, found somebody stupid enough to put them together, and we were in business. You can see by the tornado, lots of dust, lots of insulation blew. It was dirty. We thought we were going to see a lot of respiratory illnesses coming after the fact. I think what we ended up seeing was a lot of ear problems. They talked about the tornado that night. The pressure was so strong. Some people believed it actually punctured their eardrums. I don't have proof of that, but I know my son, he complained of how bad his ears hurt that night. Lost our emergency truck and everything. I had 95 employees. I had 70 FTEs, and 68 employees lost their homes. What do you do when that happens? How do you get them to come back to work? I was in a meeting 3 days after the tornado, and this guy said, I hadn't slept for 3 days. He goes, what do you need? I said, I need a hospital. I can get you one. So I thought he hadn't slept for 3 days either. I'm thinking, you're crazy. He goes, no. There's a tent hospital, EMED's unit up in Topeka. I think I can get it. And I had seen a presentation by General Rose. They took it down to Katrina, and I said, hey, that'd be great, because it's going to be a while till I can rebuild. And then the next day they came and said, we need a check for $2.5 million. So then I went back to Plan G, and then the governor stepped in and said, we'll figure out who pays for it later. I will tell you, if you take a resource and they tell you we'll figure out who pays for it later, you need to start saying your prayers that day and say them continually till they find out who pays for it. Because that was a scary, scary prospect, but it did get paid for. So 68 employees lost their homes. On recovery, we checked our site. We didn't have anybody. One of the biggest fears is, well, they were all in the basement. What if somebody came in the building looking for shelter and got trapped? Spent a lot of time looking for that. We protected our records. Some of the tarps I bought in Wichita, we used to cover our records the next day. Recovered our pharmaceuticals. If you work in a hospital or a clinic, how many places do you store pharmaceuticals? How many places do you have that epi tray? How many places in the respiratory therapy department do you have meds? I'm telling you, you're going to have to know. That was one of the first things they kept telling me. They brought in the KBI. Where's your drugs? You got to get them. You got to get them. What if someone gets to them? So we pulled up my truck and loaded. I had all the black trash bags, and we loaded all those drugs in my truck and in the ambulance that was spared. Now, I will tell you that almost became an issue because they locked our town down. The night I came in, I got in at 3 in the morning. I went through 5 roadblocks to get into Greensburg. They locked us down almost immediately and kept us locked down for about a month. I got into town because I had a picture ID showing I was the hospital administrator. So I get the drugs out, put them in the back of my truck, and I'm driving down the street, and a policeman stops me from Topeka and says, ma'am, show me your credentials. And I showed him, and he says, well, what's in the back of your truck? Because they were checking for looting. I said, well, there's drugs. And he says, what kind of drugs? And I said, you name it, I got it. So he tells me, it gets scarier. So he tells me, I'm going to take them from you because it's not safe for you to be driving around with drugs like this. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, okay, I don't know you, And so I said, well, let's call incident command. Do you have a radio? Call incident command. Let's log it, that I'm giving you these drugs. Why I thought of that, I don't know, but I did. I want to log that you're taking these drugs. 2 weeks later, I get a call from the KBI. You are so in trouble. DEA is here. Your drugs are missing. What did you do with them? So we were able to go back through the records and find out who had them, contact him, and he'd put them in the firearms trailer, not the medical trailer. So if you give stuff to somebody, make sure you know who you're giving it to, and you might keep a record of it because it could come back to haunt you. We began trying to salvage and store things. We had never thought about having storage pods brought in. We had alternate plans. There was a assisted living place in the community, very expensive to bring those in. I think these first ones were about $2,000 a piece. A month later, we got them for $200 a piece to be brought in. So you might want to look at off-site storage. Start meeting with lots of people. Know where your mercury thermometers are. Those little rectal thermometers you lose for kids. They're going to ask you how many you have and where are they. EPA is very adamant. You've got to know where all that stuff is. You've got to know where your paint is. I always told people, add minutes to your cell phone. I had 20 pages of phone calls the first month from Autel. Now, everybody wanted us to succeed. They stepped in and actually gave us free phone service. They didn't charge us any extra for, I think, the first 2 months. Get a business card. What do your business cards show? Do they show your regular phones? Guess what you don't have when this happens? You don't have a regular phone. All I had was my cell phone. And we'd always been told, don't use cell phones because people can hear what you're saying. I didn't know my staff's cell phone numbers. I didn't know their families. There was a staff couple that I couldn't find, and there was 2 circles on their house, but I couldn't find where their bodies had been taken and didn't know their family to call them. They'd gone to El Dorado to a parent's house. So we now have family contact information that we can call. Meet with your insurance, know what it covers. We were vastly underinsured. This is Mike Frost, the one I told you has been my mentor. Meet your employee needs. I was asking people to come back and work within 2.5 weeks. They were all in temporary shelters 30, 40 miles away. The kids had been through the tornado. We didn't know what to do. Talk about a bad thing. I told my staff I'd pay them for 2 months. Guess what happened when I told them they had to come back and work in 2.5 weeks? So I always tell my staff, I tell them the truth no matter what. So I had to say, you know what, I'm telling you the truth. You'll get your salary for 2 months, but if you don't work for me now, you don't have a job at 2 months and 1 day. And they did come back. Now, on the other hand, I had staff that were driving 30 miles away, one way, in borrowed cars, trying to help me survive and get back to business. And I didn't need all my staff. That was a problem. I didn't need all my staff. I didn't have patients yet. I didn't have a dietary department. So we talked with them and said, okay, we agree. And they were doing it to help me. In the long run, it was hurting me and hurting them because they weren't getting on with their lives. And they weren't planning on rebuilding. They were housekeeping, dietary people making $8 an hour. So we met with them and said, you know what? If you need to go on and do something different, stay in the community that you're living in, work closer to home, stay with your children, we understand that. When we get rebuilt, we will hire you back at your current salary, your current benefits. And I had about 15 people leave under those circumstances. We started a daycare. Didn't know what to do with our children, got with the state. We actually started a daycare in our tent. Worked wonderful. Didn't have a dietary department. Guess who watched the kids? Dietary. Guess who were really glad when the new hospital opened? Dietary. They were probably more thrilled than I was. I always tell people, keep accurate time records, keep records of purchases. FEMA doesn't pay for purchases, they pay for leases. And I said, arrange for a fast FEMA 101. There's books out there that tell you what FEMA do, but it changes. In our disaster, FEMA was still paying admin cost. They took a percentage of your total loss, and they gave you that toward admin where you could buy computers and hire someone to help you with the accounting. They didn't do that for the next tornado. So get with FEMA, find out what the current regs are. I made the mistake. I was adamant I was going to rebuild, so I started the next day, bought some buildings, had to actually go back. No one's from FEMA in here, right? Anybody married to a FEMA guy? Had to go back and sell them back to the company and then lease it from them because FEMA wasn't going to pay for the purchase. Meet needs one day at a time, take time for yourself, keep all the receipts. If you've got staff working, they're going to pay for your staff, but you're going to have to prove what they were doing. Make sure you have a current inventory. Under the disaster rules, they'll pay to go back to where you were. Do you know where you were? Do you know what you had? We did our inventory in December. This was in May. When you pay money for an expert, listen to them. That was probably the hardest lesson I learned when they were building. I'd never built a hospital before. You hire experts, listen to what they tell you. You still have the right to give your opinion, but if you hire an expert, you need to move away and let them do it. Use volunteers for help. We thought we were pretty self-sufficient. That was probably another hard thing for me, to let people come in and help me. I had a tendency to want to do it myself. I'd still be digging out if I was doing it myself, to be honest with you. We talk about paying it forward. An organization came in from New York, and my children and I have actually volunteered in other communities that's had disasters now. So we tell people, accept the help gracefully and then pay it forward. Begin working on rebuilding. Again, the mobile medical unit was very helpful for us. Salvation Army fed us till July 4th. I said that date will be in my memory because I didn't have to cook till July 4th. This is what we started with. This is our tents. I always tell people, I talk about porta potties. In our community, we had porta potties at the rodeo, and so I tell my children, that's for the drunk cowboys. You don't want to use the porta potties. Go to the bathroom before you go. Don't drink fluids, and we'll go home and go potty. So we had porta potties for 6 months. Guess what happened? We had a daycare on site. My x-ray tech had two small girls. She's had a baby since. She had 2 small girls at that point. And Gina was pretty stressed. She didn't lose her home. It was almost worse for her. She had 3 families move in with her. I was kind of glad I had lost my home, to be honest with you. But she had 3 families move in. So she was pretty stressed. Little girl said, Mommy, I wash my hands. I don't ever forget, not one time when I go to the porta potty. So Gina started thinking, wait a minute. The hand sanitizers are up pretty high. She's little. How's she doing that? Show me what you're doing. Guess what she was using? The pink thing in the porta potty. Do you know what the pink thing is, girls? It's a deodorizer in the urinal. So I was talking at a meeting in town and said something about what a learning curve our children have had. And the 5th grade teacher said, well, what is that pink thing if it's not soap? And she was serious. So we never thought about the 101 porta potty lessons. We learned how to communicate. We still use our cell phones a lot. We have a system, and I'm not sure how it works, to be honest with you. It goes through the school. If I want my employees, all the people in town have signed up for it. And it's like when the school bus goes to a sports event, they send over the texts or the cell phones, the bus will be here at this time, or the bus is here. So we don't even have to wait in the parking lot anymore, which is kind of nice. We did set up an AM radio, but again, you had to be in the town to hear it, and people didn't live in town for a long time. We did open, this is our temporary hospital. It was our tent hospital. This is the modulars we eventually went to. This is the campers that we lived in. I lived in that for about 8 weeks before I moved to Femaville. If I ever go on a game show and win a camping trip, who wants it? Because I'll never camp in a camping trailer again, ever. We did start we opened our temporary clinic in August. Along with survival is how do you get rid of the past? So we started tearing down our workplace. We found a new place to eat. You can tell food's primary for me. The restaurants, it took a long time to open back up. In fact, it's only been about a year that we've had restaurants really in town. They opened up in little campers, then we had little tents we could eat in. And then we found a place to live. FEMA came in and we called this Femaville. This was my house right here. If you get to know me, you'll find out that I don't look for the worst in any situation. I believe that you can make the best of something. People would call me and say, I need to come see you, Mary, and I'd say, I'll go south on Main Street to the white trailer. And, I always knew I was going to get this phone call, okay, what white trailer? And I'd tell them how to come. And it was interesting as I spoke to different groups. One time I spoke to the KHA group, and there was like 30 people, and they were in Pratt. Got on a bus and went through my FEMA trailer. Was it the most well-built FEMA trailer? No, but it was a blessing. I didn't get to live with my children for a while after the tornado. It had 3 bedrooms. I could cook. I could actually wash clothes. And we all survived it. I always talk about there was a girl, she had 2 teenage boys who liked to drink, and so every white trailer looked the same. So she bought a pink flamingo and put it in the yard and said, if you really can't find it, just look for the pink flamingo. So guess who got arrested one night? Because guess who else put a pink flamingo in their yard? They come home, try to kick in the door because the key won't work. So we had lots of interesting things going on. This was actually my house being torn down. And then I tell these are my 2 younger children at the time of the tornado. I tell them what an opportunity we've had. What an opportunity. Who would have ever thought that President Bush would call me on my cell phone and say, I want to talk to you and your children. I want to hear your story. I want to hear what happened with you. Montel Williams came. Jerry Moran was a big supporter in Greensburg. We tried to tell our children you have to look for the good in everything, and this is one of the good things. You're having opportunities you've never had before. I got to talk fast because I'm almost out of time. And then I say, every disaster, you get through the disaster, and it's like, okay, I'm done. You're never done in healthcare. We had a helicopter crash. I'd never had that happen before. Happened on a day when the governor was in our community in a helicopter. Talk about scared. This happened to be a Life Watch helicopter. They didn't have a patient yet, but they did crash. 3 staff members, they were injured, but they all survived. And then in March, we had 28 inches of snow. Every emergency vehicle shut down. No staff members could get in. Again, had we planned for that? Yeah. I knew the snow was coming in. I went and bought $300 worth of food. I actually cooked for 30 truck drivers per day. And how did I get it to them? Because we were stranded. GTI bought in those big tractors that you climb up on, and they have the big cab. So I tell people there's a way to get around everything. There's a way to get around everything. You just have to figure out how to do it. You can't plan for everything. Your plans may not match. But if you plan, you know how to plan, you know how to adapt. Have I ever had to back up and say, gosh, that was the stupidest thing I ever have done? Yes, I've had to do that too. But I say when all's said and done, we just need to learn lessons from our children. You can have fun wherever you are. The pink thing is not soap, and remember to wear shoes to the basement. This is my son. I got a call one day. He says, Mom, can I play in the mud? Yeah, you can play in the mud. I'm at work. Not a problem. I started getting phone calls. You need to go home. It took 3 days to get the mud off that kid. Mitigation we've done. I talk about we had picture IDs. My doctor couldn't get into town that night. Couldn't get into town because he couldn't prove who he was. He had an ID. He had a driver's license. But he didn't have a picture ID saying he was a doctor, he said. I had a picture ID. I always carry my ID card with me. I always tell people, make sure you've got ID on you and tell us who you are. One of the mistakes we made was I gave candy bars to my staff. I'm a firm believer in food. If you wear your name tag and I walk around on a given day, you get a candy bar. So they kept their name tags on their desk because they were afraid they'd miss out on the candy bar. When the tornado came, it destroyed it. They couldn't get in the building. So anyway, you can kind of read this. I think this is going to be on a website somewhere maybe where it talks about some of the things. Talk about your safety plans. Set priorities. People come first. Never, ever an issue. People come first. My staff had moved crash carts, med carts to the basement, looked at securing the electronic information. Allow employees to make informed decisions, but tell them they've got the responsibility to do it too. I firmly believe that every person in a building can make a difference. In our building, if a housekeeper sees somebody who needs assistance, they better offer it. In our building, if you're within 10 feet of someone and you don't acknowledge them, you're in trouble. You have to acknowledge people. You have to make contact with them. That's important. Develop redundant communications. This is where we used to shelter before the tornado. This is where we would have been that night. We would have had over 100 people in that hallway that night. So if you could look at your plans objectively, or make sure you know what you're doing. Things we should have had in our plans, again, contacts for bathrooms, duplicate name tags. We now keep 2 name tags. I keep one set and they have their own. So if we do have a disaster, I can pull those out. Get used to going to lots of meetings, ask for what you need, be flexible. Again, these are emergency plans. Evaluate your insurance on a regular basis. You can kind of scroll down them real quick. Now, one of the things that's come up recently is, are all of you aware of NIMS? That's a type of education that tells you chain of command. I haven't kept up on my NIMS, and my emergency preparedness person told me the other day, Mary, if we have a disaster, you can't be the leader. You know, nobody asked me what NIMS compliance, what NIMS level I had during the tornado. I'll be real honest with you. It's nice to have the education. Have alternate employee contact. That's very important. Practice your plans. We kind of all had a sense of humor. You can kind of tell by these pictures. This house with the red shoes was sitting in the middle of the street. We talk a lot about being a survivor, not a victim. It could have been much worse that night. We could have lost a lot of our families that night. This is a picture of our new building. We did have the opportunity. We built LEED. We haven't got our certification yet. We're still waiting on approval of 2 more points. But we feel like we will be LEED Platinum. We'd be the first hospital. I've had people, did we take advantage of the situation? No. This is our building. I'd like to think we would have built the same building. For 15 beds, we did build a little bit smaller. CT room. Again, we had to build back to where we were. We do have a wind generator. We collect water off our roof. We use our rainwater to flush our toilets. We do have a storm shelter in the basement. And I always tell people I like this book, How to Survive Change You Didn't Ask For. She said the trick is to have what's called a growth mindset. Ask what I can use from this to create success. And that's what you have to survive a disaster. Thanks for letting me share the story. I appreciate it. Before I do that, at our open house, we did a book. It's got pictures of what we looked like before, what we looked like during the tornado or tent operation. I have 3 copies. And I always wonder, how am I going to do this? Anyone have a birthday today? Anyone have a birthday this week? Hey, she can share with you. Let's see, what would be the next one? Whose house has been destroyed in a tornado? Nobody? Okay. Who wants a book? Oh, someone has their hand up. Okay. I'm sorry. I know what you've been through. I always tell people when we went to rebuild, I didn't know what 14 curtain rods cost. That was a big surprise. Okay, who wants the last book? There you go.
Are there any questions?
Uh-oh, did that mean I failed?
What was the closest hospital that you sent people to? Because Pratt would have been
Pratt's 30 miles.
about the closest.
Cold Water's 25, Kinsley's 25, and Dodge is 45.
How many of the people that were injured were able to receive the care that they needed, critical care, based on those locations, and how many had to be sent into Wichita?
Pratt doesn't do a lot of surgery. They had a surgeon. Most of our critical people ended up going by helicopters into Wichita. You know, sometimes they were sent to Pratt. I tell people the tornado happened at 9:45. At 3 o'clock, we had our last patients out of the hospital itself. No, those weren't the critical people. Most of the people that died that night were dead when the tornado was over. It wasn't that they died of the injuries. I think we had 2 that died in ambulances or died, when they were receiving care. But it happened pretty quickly. Our emergency preparedness director talks about one of his biggest fears was the tornado was about 1.5 miles wide. It actually spawned 2 other tornadoes that went around it. So at one time, there were 3 tornadoes on the ground in Greensburg. It went through the town, went across the highway, and turned around and came back. My son talks about our house was destroyed. He was in the basement with his dad, came up when the tornado came back. And so they had to go back down, and that's when we had more damage to our houses when it came back around. So because of the warnings that we had, and because we have a lot of memorandums of MOUs, memorandums of understanding, people had started responding even before the tornado hit. I don't know if you've ever heard a tornado emergency called. They tell me that night the weatherman was saying, this is a tornado emergency. It's going to hit directly. They knew it was going to hit directly. So on our county lines were ambulances lined up to come in. And so they could see the red lights after the tornado, and they started moving before the tornado got all the way out. So one of the concerns that we tell people is if you're responding, you got to wait. You got to wait till it's over with. You're not doing anybody any good if you come in and get hurt too. That's just another person being hurt. So I think most of the people got very quick care, very fast. A lot of it was pulling them out. And most of them were safe. When you look at our community and say we had 13 die, 11 that night, one of the things we've looked at our deaths, one of them was a truck driver pulled out of his vehicle. 3 of them were people in the community. We have a mental health center, and they bring people into transition living, people that aren't from the community, typically don't have cars, typically live in little older houses. 3 of those patients died that night. But from what I've been told is, we had a lot of scratches, a lot of injury, a lot of, cuts, that type of thing, and they mostly went to Pratt. Now, Dodge did go on diversion. I think they received 5 patients and went on diversion almost immediately. So we quit going west almost immediately.
Fishback?
Yeah, I did my rural preceptorship in Greensburg for 2 months in 1982. But anyway, what happened to the world's deepest hand-dug well? That's what I want to know.
Well, the well itself is the deepest hand-dug well, so it was underground. But the building itself was destroyed, and the meteorite that was in there was pushed. Well, it was pushed out the building, but they found it almost immediately. So that's one of the things that hasn't been rebuilt. When they started rebuilding, they started building the infrastructure first. But you probably know Dr. Bradley. He was our chief, our board chair at that time. He lost his home. That was one of the disasters of the hospital. We lost a whole population in the community. People my age, we rebuilt back because we had our jobs, our kids were in school, but we lost a whole generation of people that didn't work anymore, people whose children lived in other places, weren't sure of what was going to happen in our community. It was really easy for their kids to say, come live with me, get an apartment, get a house, that's already built. Very difficult to rebuild. No local services, 30 miles to the closest town. My house was started in August following the tornado in May, and I moved in March. And I was the first one on my block. I was the first one on 2 blocks. It was kind of scary. Yes, ma'am? It's probably about 900 now. It's gone back to about 900. And we've had some of the older people come back, which is really nice. They've seen what's happened, and they're coming back. But what we found is when we started rebuilding, it cost more to rebuild in Greensburg, Kansas than it did in Kansas City because they had to bring everything in. There was no place for the workers to stay. Everything was brought in. So very expensive to rebuild. It took a strong commitment to rebuild. It took strong roots to rebuild. We were very fortunate. I had 2 doctors and 3 mid-levels. They all lost their homes but one. The one doctor stayed. The other doctor left. His dad was critically injured in the tornado when he went back to Wichita to be with his dad during surgery. And I can announce that a week ago he signed to come back. He's going to come back and practice at our hospital. And he's from KU.
I have a quick question.
You.
Yes, me. So what would you take to the basement?
What would I take to the basement? Well, everything I have that I need is in my basement. That's where I keep my passports and that type thing. I tell people, unless of a disaster would have been worse for us, our disaster was bad enough that it turned out to be probably good. A lot of people didn't have their driver's license. If you just lose your house, you're going to have to worry about how to replace everything. The state government stepped in. They reprinted every title that came out of Kiowa County or every vehicle that was registered in Kiowa County. And we had to go to Pratt and say, I'm Mary Sweet, and they handed me a title to my car. because insurance won't pay for your destroyed car without a title. Did you know that? Our driver's license, could I prove who I was? No, without going and getting a birth certificate. So they set someone at a table, and you walked in and you said, I'm Mary Sweet, and they were from Greensburg, and they said, yeah, that's Mary Sweet, and they gave me a driver's license. They reprinted every medical license of every one of my staff members for free. So everybody, I tell people, they talk about the way government works. There wasn't a person that didn't want this town to rebuild. I don't know how many of you work with the fire marshal. Anybody with the fire? I always hate to say bad things about people, but the fire marshal called me flying down to Greensburg in a helicopter. He says, they're going to be there in 15 minutes. So I told my staff, pack up your stuff. We're out of here. We can't, he's not going to let us operate. He walked in and said, you got any issues? No. Need any help? Yeah. He says, okay, just call me if you need some help. Walked out and didn't close me down. Medicare doesn't pay for patients to stay in temporary facilities. That's a rule of theirs. We have people come out from Washington, D.C., and I said, this is all I got. I got a trailer house with 2 rooms on each end. I have 4 beds. And they said, well, let's think about it. And they actually gave us permission. They said, what kind of patients are you going to admit? I'm a critical access hospital. I never did surgery before. I'm not going to do it today. Didn't deliver babies. We're the medication compliance, dehydration, diabetes, that type of thing. We didn't even keep MIs. And they allowed us to do that. Now, when the Medicare surveyors came out in March of this year, or March of 2010, when we moved in our new building, they asked for my statistics, and they said, this can't be right. It shows like 0.02 patients census. I said, well, I had 39 patients last year. Was that a lot? No, but guess what it did for the 39 people that got to stay in their community, and they didn't have to leave. Fortunately, we are much busier now. And y'all are welcome to come by and see us sometime. We're proud of the building. We're proud of what we've accomplished. Hopefully we'll have our LEED certification very soon. So we'd love to show it.
Thanks, Mary.
And my son was safe, trust me. That was a very nervous thing. People ask me, how did you do your personal versus your professional? We combined it. When my staff members, you have to be flexible. When they had to go and try to rebuild their houses, I didn't make them work from 8 to 5. We cut out the rules. You didn't have to work 40 hours to get full-time benefits. If you can work 20 and you can get your job done, it saves me money, and you're happier. So you got to be flexible.